Hi and welcome to the Machine Ethics Podcast. I'm joined this month by Joanna J Bryson in the Toppings and Company Bookshop in Bath. This month we're talking about new principles of robotics, AI as commercial products, robots as slaves, system AI, the ethical paradox of living forever, semantics of rights and welfare, and definitions of legal personhood. You can also find us on Patreon at patreon.com/machineethics and on the website machine-ethics.net and on iTunes. Thanks for listening. Thank you for joining me in Topping and Company Booksellers in Bath. It's a pleasure to be in this environment and to be talking about AI, surrounded by all these books. And
it's a beautiful place.
It's kind of like a homage to the past as we're talking about the future, sort of thing.
Maybe that's actually one of the really interesting questions about artificial intelligence and ethics in human society. What are we going towards?
Yeah.
So you know, there's this store is. You could say it's retro, you could also say it's hipster. And part of the thing about hipster is people are actually saying, we want to have something different. We want to know the person who made it. We want to have all those pieces.
Yeah.
And that's actually, it used to be what it had to be. And then we were kind of scrounging. Now it's actually a luxury. It's a luxury to have really good custom-made bespoke stuff. And maybe that's a luxury. I mean, there's other problems, obviously, on the landscape and the horizon. You know, we can't not ignore all the political stuff that's going on now and everything else too. But really, generally speaking, humanity is doing quite well for itself, and there's no reason that we can't have more and more people enjoying this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the political stuff, we could almost have a separate podcast and talk all day about that sort of stuff, so we won't, unfortunately, go down that rabbit hole. But I guess some of the AI stuff does have some of that in it, for sure. Do you want to just briefly just introduce yourself and what you do and where you're working and why we're here, I guess?
Oh, okay. Well, we're here because you emailed me. And actually, one of the interesting things I do is sometimes ask other people why they wanted to talk to me, because I do so many different things. Mm-hmm. But the short version of this, you do edit, right? We're not like... It's okay that I can go...
Go for it. It's fine.
Okay. So basically, my first degree was actually psychology, but I have a PhD from MIT in artificial intelligence, and so I'm mostly known for my artificial intelligence. Although these days I'm getting more known for my AI ethics. So AI ethics was originally something I sort of did on the side. While I was doing my PhD, I noticed that, people kept coming up to me and telling me that this pile of motors that didn't work at all, that it would be unethical to unplug it. And I was like, well, it's not plugged in. And I realized they just had no concept of what actually created ethical obligation. And at that time, I thought, well, gee, that's strange. And hey, I'm an MIT PhD student. I think it's strange. It must actually be strange, and I should write it up. It was a very Victorian idea of science, you know. So I did write it up, and we put it in. Eventually, we got it into some really crappy cybernetics meeting or whatever. It's ultimately that paper got into IJCAI, another version that we wrote like 10 years later.
What was that called?
It was called Just an Artifact.
Right.
I can't remember which is which. The one version is just an artifact, and the other one's just another artifact. But anyway, the point is that a lot of the things, actually, and this is really interesting and important about AI, a lot of the things that we worry about with AI either aren't going to happen at all, or they're true, but they're also true of other artifacts. And it's actually quite interesting that in some ways it might be good that we suddenly have this personified kind of technology that makes us attend to what we are doing with our society and with our lives and the vulnerabilities we have to technology. But I think, in other ways, it's nuts.
I think on that point of it being relative to other things, I think you mentioned the robotics 2012 or 10, 6, the UK put together, like, here's...
Oh, sure, the EPSRC Principles of Robotics.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, so I wrote... This is really... I don't know. Okay, so I'm sorry, I digressed, but I'll do this quick digression.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first piece of policy I ever did was this 2010 thing, which it wasn't just me, and I wasn't the one who started it, and I have no idea how they found me. But they suddenly somebody really did notice my papers, and I was in one of, I don't remember, like 30 people that was invited to this meeting. It was called the EPSRC Robotics Retreat. Yep. And it seemed like they did it because they sort of thought they ought to do it, but they weren't really producing a product. It was a 3-day meeting, lots of people, fairly expensive person that was chairing it all and things like that.
Yeah.
I forgot her name off the top of my head. Anyway, famous television personality
Wow.
chairing it and things like that. All down in New Forest, and yet there was no deliverable. And all of us, as much as we like, you might think like, academics like not working and, sitting around in hotels or whatever, but actually we had lots and lots and lots of things to do. And so for 3 days, we needed to have some product. And so actually it was on a breakout session that me and Lillian Edwards said, why don't we replace the Asimov's laws? Because that's what everybody thinks of, and they don't actually solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so we drafted up the principles of robotics, and then the whole meeting said, like, what a great idea, and we just spent the rest of the meeting fixing that. So obviously our first guest was, so it really was the product of all the people there, and ultimately with a lot of work and consensus building, we wound up with something we could all sign.
Yeah.
And actually that process is documented in one of the papers that's coming out this year. There was a 5th anniversary meeting about the principles of robotics at the AISB last year. The AISB is actually the oldest AI meeting there is, which was founded in Edinburgh. It's actually a British meeting. It's the original AI meeting from 53 years ago. But anyway, last year's meeting was in Sheffield, and we had an entire special issue at the time it was a symposium. It's turned into a special issue of various people's thinking about the EPSRC principles and where they're going and what they're good for and whether they should be changed and things like that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that struck me with the principles is that when you're saying it, some people have this idea of AI and it's actually can be put on other things. That's what struck me with actually some of those principles, that actually some of those things could be relevant to other things as well, or like are advantageous for other things, or
yeah. Well, no, I mean, actually, that's sort of the point. We were, you can actually look, there's 5 principles, and you could almost look at it like there's, the first 3 are basically saying, look, it's a product. And then the last 2 are saying, look, you own it.
Yeah.
And and that's why it's different from Asimov's laws. The obligations are for the robot. Here, the obligations are towards the manufacturers who produce it and that produce commercial products, and then secondly to the so for example, the final one is the 5th one is that you have to be able to tell whose robot a robot is, right, and it's directly analogous to a car. So we're actually taking something, and that was the thing. Lillian Edwards is some genius law professor. The whole thing was that we were making it so that you didn't have to change British law very much, or at all, basically. You're just saying, look, we need to make this fit within British law. And that robots should just be an ordinary part of our society. That's just an extension of what we already have.
Yeah, and that makes it productized, and you can legislate it and insure it and all those sorts of things that come along with
exactly. But some people, there is a nonlinearity here because it is autonomous, but we already sort of had that. I don't know if you remember this. My French is terrible, so I'll just say the English translation. There was a painting. It's actually in the Edinburgh Gallery of Modern Art. It's a famous French painting of a governor. Those things they spin around and they help monitor the correct speed for like a loom or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
And it's actually, the title in French is "Girl Without a Mother." Yeah. So I think there was already this fascination by the fact that this was sensing and acting, and this is from a couple hundred years ago. I think I just saw the thing was built a couple hundred years ago, but the painting I think was 20th century actually. But anyway,
was that a Duchamp painting? It sounds like something he would do.
Yeah. I could show you on my phone because I just saw the special exhibitions. We can figure that out.
I think maybe I could insert something there.
Yeah. Don't worry. Yeah. Okay. So insert the correct answer.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. I'm terrible with names. There you
go. One of my favorite artists actually.
It's like green and gold leaf.
Yeah, I do think I know what.
Which painting I'm talking about.
Exactly.
We've been to Edinburgh Modern Art Gallery, But also, he went through a lot of different phases. Is that what you mean? Exactly. During the actual World War II, there was some weird social realism. I just saw him in Zurich, a special issue, a special exhibit of that. So that's why.
Yeah. So it's not. It's like not a new thing in a way.
Oh, right. So the point. Yeah. So the point is that. It isn't new, although it's relatively new. It's only been a few hundred years that we've had machines that could take actions, right? But it's still not totally brand new. And in some ways, I mean, some people consider companies to be artificial intelligence, right? So then you have a different set of problems. And but I don't know. The where do you want to go with this?
I know this is a brilliant segue. Joanna.
Yes.
Hi. So usually the first thing I actually ask is, what is AI and what is artificial intelligence to you?
That's easy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's just to me. But so the most important thing is to understand intelligence. Mm-hmm. And then from a computer science perspective, whether it's artificial or natural is sort of neither here nor there. It's isomorphic. So the what is intelligence? It's the capacity to do the right thing at the right time.
Right.
Now, normally you need to put a few more qualifications on that, because you could say, well, a rock is doing the right thing in some sense, right?
Yeah.
But so normally we say doing the right thing at the right time in response to a dynamic environment.
Yeah.
So that means that something unpredictable happens, and then you're able to compensate for that unpredictable thing.
Right.
So by that definition, incidentally, plants are intelligent.
Because
right?
they enact actions.
Because they perceive something dynamic. So in the wild, plants are growing with other plants, and some part of the plant no longer gets light. It drops that part off, and there's some part over here that is getting light. It grows that direction. It's responding to an environment that's dynamic. Okay, slowly dynamic, but still dynamic. And
but I mean, in that sense, if we made a machine or like something artificial that did that, then that would still be quite phenomenal, I would say.
Well,
even
phenomenal.
if it's something simple like that, some sort of...
I mean, that's what phenomenal is an interesting way to put it. One of the things I'm trying to say is it's kind of ordinary and that we've been doing it for a while, but maybe you're right. You know, and that's one of the arguments I often make, is that if you took a calculator back 500 years, you'd be burnt at the stake, right?
Yeah.
You know, so what we think is ordinary now, and we can all, like kids and for school projects, make little calculators, like they learn to build little circuit boards or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So we all know how to do it to some extent. Okay. If you don't know how to do it, don't worry. But basically, we could look up how to do it and at least add up to 8 or something on a calculator. But the point is that it's both ordinary and phenomenal, and I think the reason that we tend to think of AI as, so then what happens is you say, oh, but calculators aren't AI.
Yeah.
I've literally heard a full professor of artificial intelligence say, oh, driverless cars, they're not AI. And you're just like, what? A driverless car is sensing and acting in an incredibly difficult environment. It's doing all kinds of things that humans do. It has to be able to, the only thing it doesn't do that a human does is pick where it's going. Yeah. But it picks the way that it goes. And it's responding to other people, and it's dealing with emergencies and, all kinds of things. And so to me, that's absolutely intelligent. Yeah. But so I think the reason that we don't recognize intelligence when we see it is because we think intelligent means human. Mm-hmm. And so it has a whole lot of other baggage on top of it. Yeah. And so one of the things I really work on is to try to get people to divide all those terms up. Because human means human. You don't really need intelligence to mean human. Yeah. And conscious means something too. I mean, conscious, if you're a psychologist, there's some really interesting things about why are you conscious some of the time, why you're not conscious some of the time. Why are you, at the same time conscious of some things and not of other things, right? So you're awake, and you're conscious in the sense of being awake. See, already we have two meanings of conscious here. So there's the conscious, which means I'm awake, but I'm only conscious mostly of what you're saying and what's on your face or whatever, because I'm looking at you. Yeah. And I might not be noticing like your hand gesture. Okay, now I'm talking about it, so I notice it, but I might have unconsciously been noticing your hand gestures before, and it might have affected like somehow the way turn taking and things like that. Yeah. So we have nice, neat, well, even there, as I just pointed out, we have a sloppy, dualistic definition of conscious, but we don't need to actually also saddle that word with something that we're ethically obliged to. There's a word for that. It's called the thing that's responsible for its own actions is called a moral agent, and the thing that we're responsible to take care of is called a moral patient. Right. And there's also something called a moral subject, which is basically both of those things. Right. And then you can have philosophical debates about whether it's possible to be a moral subject and not a moral agent. Yeah. Right. So. Yeah. And I think I mean, there's kind of moralistic mazes or kind of analogies that help us with playing with that sort of environment and how that would play out. And Asimov kind of did some of that for us. It started down that kind of, I've made this analogy and it has a robot in it, it has humans in it,
and then messes with how the autonomy affects the humans and vice versa, which is kind of neat. And now we're doing this in different ways. I think there's the patient there's a lot to do with turning off machines, and whether the machines, it's not doing anything, but in turning it off, are you making it a patient, and even though it can't.
Well, no, because I would say that when you turn it off, then even if it had any patience before, while it's off, it doesn't, because nothing can affect it, right?
Right.
So that's not an issue. But the thing is, as humans, we're very concerned about the passage of time and death and things like that.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say as humans, as animals. That's something we inherit from being evolved systems, right? So that's just fairly basic.
Yeah.
And but the fact that we're understanding these complicated artifacts by identifying with them means that unfortunately we do a lot of inaccurate work on it too. It's a fundamental way to get tricked by con artists too, right? You know that but this isn't deliberate by the AI. I'm just saying that generally speaking, assuming someone else is pretty much like you is a pretty good way to guess what they might want to do. But in the case of artificial intelligence, it isn't. In fact, one of the things that drives me crazy is we have tons and tons and tons of artificial intelligence all around us, changing our lives, changing what it means to be human, affecting things like, our privacy, our liberty. And people don't think it's artificial intelligence because it doesn't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have these things, these robots that, and I understand it. There's the Pepper robot, for example. Beautiful thing. You cannot help but be emotionally engaged by it. And yet, I know it's deceptive. I'm angry about it like I'm angry about certain politicians that we weren't going to mention,
Yeah.
when I just see them and I realize it's sort of a deception. And it's a deception that's really doing damage to some extent if you're convincing people like, oh, this is something to worry about.
Yeah. So it's the what's the word? Humanization of an inanimate system almost. Or a anthropomorphizing something which shouldn't be.
Would you like some more tea?
In your opinion, I think I'm done for tea. Actually,
I've
had my 2 cups, and
okay, I've only had one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anyway, where were we going?
Okay.
You were saying that. Oh, the thing about humanization there is that's already ambiguous. So the identification is when you see something that's there, and you sort of export from yourself an understanding and then see it in this way that may be inaccurate. But of course, because it is an artifact, we could also humanize it. We could actually make it more like a human.
Yeah.
I mean, that was what Asimov Bicentennial Man was about. Like, in order to get socially accepted, the thing had to become, finite or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's like a fairly fundamental thing. One of my second paper actually makes this point that you have the right to autosave. So you shouldn't worry, even if we go a direction I wouldn't expect to go, and your best friend is AI or whatever.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to worry about whether to save it or whatever. It's just there's no reason. It can be backed up, wirelessly.
Yeah.
So.
That's a really interesting point. That's not something that we've covered as yet. The kind of having some sort of attachment to a machine, and then the possibility of losing that machine and anxiety attached to that, and that's almost stupidity because, like you said, there's so much technology preventing that from being realized.
Exactly. We could mass produce it, and we can have the mind backed up to a cloud somewhere, and then the mind experiences, right? The things that discriminate your robot from anybody else's is basically the experiences it's had of you, so that you have, so that what you've trained it, whatever. But anyway, you don't need to worry that it's not like your dog, because you can back it up. It's not an evolved system. And it's now notice you could, but like I said, you could. There's like games, computer games like this where there is no way to back up your character, and some people prefer playing that. And so this is a question of, what kind of standards do we want to have, and they can be different for commercial products. They could be different for entertainment versus domestic use.
Yep.
And of course, for art, anybody can do anything they want. There's a lot of art that's unique, unique objects. But yeah, I do really worry about the deception. I mean, one of the things that my group does is that I have 2 PhD students right now, and they're working on making it easier. Well, what they've shown is that the same stuff that we'd already been working on, it's called systems AI. We're trying to make it easier to build AI. But exposing those tools to ordinary people that maybe don't know anything about computers or robots already helps them to see that even though if you just saw the robot, you might think it was some kind of animal. If you see how it's making decisions, or even just that it's making decisions, maybe you don't even understand it, but just seeing the internal state of of what's behind the motion is enough to make you get a better idea of like what your relationship is to that it's really an artifact, whatever. That it's not afraid or something, it's just lost.
You don't attribute it to having any feelings and that sort of thing. Yeah.
But the thing that I wonder, and there's no way to really check, is if we did the exact same thing with a person, would you then also be more dismissive of the person? Because it might be part of what we try to do. That like I said, we sort of believe that humans are magic, and so if you de-magic it, would that make you feel less ethical obligation towards it? Which I think that would be bad.
I think that's already happening with neuroscience and determinist views in neuroscience and physics and that sort of brain activity. It's almost dehumanizing the magic.
There's been a lot of complaints. I mean, that was one of the reasons that Dawkins wrote his book, The Unweaving a Rainbow, or whatever, that he was said that, somebody sent him a letter saying that, oh, now that I've read your book, I want to kill myself or something. Which is terrible. I know it's tragic, but it's at the same time, I don't think that the world is less wonderful. I mean, he argues, but I don't know how persuasively, that the world is not less wonderful. I mean, we who are scientists really enjoy trying to pick up all these details and understanding how things work. Whether other people were happier believing that it was all magic, I don't know, and it's sort of hard to measure. And if you say, well, would you rather have the happiness of magic or medical cures? Yeah. You might even say the happiness of magic until it's your partner that's in the hospital, and then you're suddenly going, no, medical cures.
Yeah. Maybe there's a happy medium.
There might be. Yeah.
You mentioned your group. Is that the Momi?
It's supposed to be a pun on anime, so it's Amini.
Amini, right, okay.
But anyway, nobody ever gets it. I have a weird sense of humor sometimes.
Damn.
Yeah. So, but I think it actually is some people's names, because I was trying to grab the thing, so I should find out how they pronounce it. but we pronounce it Amini.
Amini, yep. And what's that? On the website it says artificial models of natural intelligence. Right. So your focus is kind of like exploring evolution and natural occurring systems.
Right. Well, the whole reason that I originally was getting the systems AI PhD was actually because I wanted to understand, as I said, psychology. Yeah. I was trying to understand how humans worked. And the one really good way to do that is to build models and trying to understand things. So that was how I visualized when I first came here. That was mostly we were trying to do science, and in order to support the science, we were building some tools. And honestly, it was often the PhD students who were working with me on the science, and then like master students and undergraduates who were building the tools. Right. But the emphasis has changed just because the world's changed. I've been in Bath now for 15 years, and now, for example, as I said, the ethics has become really salient. Everybody is the European Parliament is proposing that the European Commission should legislate that there should be a government body for regulating artificial intelligence. And that absolutely makes sense to me. I mean, it totally makes sense that we need to be thinking about how information technology is affecting our economy, our individual liberty, like I said, our security, all of these things. It totally makes sense to me. So it's becoming something that's as much a part of our society, and therefore needs to be governed. I mean, government is not some weird evil alien. Government is the way that we cooperate to come to agreements, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. And just like healthcare and the environment need government oversight, so does artificial intelligence. I have no problem with that. And
Would you be excited to get the call and make some sort of contribution to that effort?
Oh yeah, sure. I like Brussels. I mean, living there. But no, I think it's absolutely. I mean, it's frustrating right now because I'm getting amazingly cool research done, and I really feel like I want to spend all my time building some of the models. I mean, we're working on super important stuff. Like right now. I'm working, actually not with my PhD students, with the head of politics at Princeton on this problem of understanding why it is that wealth inequality, when you have high wealth inequality, you also tend to have high political polarization. Right. So this seems like the most important thing I could be working on, except what I'm actually expert in is AI and ethics and human behavior, although these are actually correlated because, again, one of the big questions is AI contributing to wealth inequality. Incidentally, not directly, we've had this happen before, but it is the current technology, or one of the current technologies. I think it's also the communication technologies in general that are causing this situation. But anyway, we could go there if we wanted to. But I wanted to get back to the point. The point is that, we don't live forever. And at this point, the taxpayers have massively invested. Taxpayers on multiple continents have massively invested in my education. I've learned a bunch of stuff. And if I can give back by helping, with the government process, of course I would. I think it's an obligation that if you hit that point where you're useful, you should help.
Yeah. So what are the kind of models that you have been producing in that with your PhD students? You said quite vaguely that you were producing, models, and
all right.
What does that kind of entail? I mean,
well, so most of the models that we build for science is actually agent-based models, which is kind of ironic. I sort of thought we were going to need to use all these complicated things you're building to build these complex cognitive models.
Yeah.
But actually, when you're trying to understand basic things like about how does communication affect cooperation, it turns out that you don't need to have all these complicated psychological stuff. You can actually, you can just look at some basic dynamics about well, here's an example. People for a while, from sort of the 1980s until sometime around 2000, sort of thought that there was no way evolution could explain cooperation. And I'm overstating it a little bit.
Yeah.
But there was this problem that mathematically, if you modeled it, it made no sense that you would cooperate.
Right.
And so people would say, if you appear to be cooperating, you must be doing something else. Maybe you're manipulating the other person, or maybe you're trying to signal your fitness, like a giant peacock tail or something like that. Well, what it turns out is that's completely wrong. And the difference was, so if you can be generous to other people around you, that makes sense as long as they are also generous, right? And so the trick is that it works so long as the thing that makes you generous is likely to be shared by a bunch of the people that you're generous to.
Yep.
Okay, so basically you can select for cooperation as long as you're more likely to benefit that cooperative trait. And it doesn't matter if that's a genetic trait or if it's a social trait that's being communicated socially. Either way, it works.
Yep.
So why were the mathematicians not seeing that? And why were we able? We were one of the groups that showed an early result about this in around 2005 or something. It was because they had it turns. I just told you that you need to be. It needs to sort of disproportionately help people that are likely to help.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that happens in the real world so long as you tend to be born near your mother, and it tends to take a finite amount of time to move a distance.
Right.
All right. Which basically means all of the time. And if you look around the world, every animal, every plant actually is made out of multiple genes that are all cooperating. Cooperation is ubiquitous. Competition is also ubiquitous, but cooperation is just as ubiquitous as competition. But in the math, they eliminated time and space because they just seemed like unnecessary complications. Right. And so then it made no sense.
Yep.
So without time and space, you would not cooperate. And that's actually, going back to AI and ethics, one of the reasons I really hate this stuff, and this isn't quite AI, but the idea of trying to make yourself immortal. Because the longer you live, the less motivation you have to help others, basically.
To do good.
And that's it's not just, I want to say that entirely, but it's not, and you could still be motivated. So there's an infinite number of ways to do it. But right now, there isn't an option for us to try to live forever. So we can't just invest only in ourselves. It doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
And so basically the trade-offs, the more you can invest in yourself, the more trade-offs there are that you might wind up choosing not to invest in others, although you still could.
Yeah.
So, and it would still make sense.
And I mean, that's all like not obvious, but like fascinating for our own condition.
Right.
What impact does that make on the condition of artificial intelligence?
All right. So now we're moving over towards thinking about the artificial intelligence as a patient itself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So this is actually a really complicated question. I mean, because to answer that question, that's when you really do have to go, deeply philosophical, basically. Because the point is, then you have to say, what is it that really matters? And when you get down to it, there isn't anything that really matters. I mean, what does that mean? there's stuff that really, really matters to humans, but
Yes.
things only matter relative to other things, right?
Yep.
And for us, like I said, we care about things like, living forever, having successful children, having friends we can rely on that won't stab us in the backs or whatever, that we can go out and see. Why? Because we're involved. We're monkeys, basically. So we
Yeah.
really, really need coalition partners, and we really, really want to pass our genes into the future. And, so those are things that highly motivate us. And so I've always argued that I think, I can imagine, because, hey, I've read all the sci-fi too,
Yeah.
at least all the old sci-fi. I've been busy lately.
You haven't been like closing your eyes
Right,
to
right.
it. Yeah.
No, I love it too. I mean, come on, we
Yeah.
all love it, right? So I can imagine it, but I don't actually, as a scientist, think it's coherent that we could pass our values to something else that's not also some kind of a ape, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense to me. And also, so there's a lot of things that we would share in common with apes, but that they wouldn't have some of our other motivations because they don't have access to language.
Yeah. So I think I've written down here that kind of argument, and also the robots are slaves piece that you wrote, which you obviously kind of not go back on, but say you don't like the terminology.
Do you want me to do that whole thing?
We'll come back to it.
Okay.
But in that frame of mind, you're basically saying that robots or artificial intelligence or artificial things can never have human type rights, basically, because you're not attributing things that like feelings or life and death to those things, and therefore they can never be kind of like socially introduced.
You've got something fundamentally wrong here.
Yes.
The thing that you have fundamentally wrong is that I would never say that this couldn't happen.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
So the point is that both our ethical system and our robots are artifacts.
Yeah.
So, like I just said, we could make a robot like this, a piece of art that we would be obliged to try to keep around, right?
Yep.
And we could also, as the European Parliament has discussed, just make it a law, which is part of our ethical system, that we're obliged, that robots have rights. We're obliged to. So we could do those kinds of things. I'm only arguing, well, there's two things. First of all, what I was just arguing is that that's incoherent, and I don't, that it sounds like a good idea, but it doesn't actually make sense when you get down to it. And I could go into details about some of the reasons that's a bad idea.
Yep.
But the other thing is that I generally say it's not that we can't do it, it's that we shouldn't.
Yes. Yeah.
And so actually the real title of the book chapter you're talking about is Robots Should Be Slaves, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually slightly wrong, because if you actually bother to read the chapter, which not everybody who gets angry about the title does,
right,
it actually says robots will be owned, and so we should build them not to mind being owned.
Yeah.
And so the reason I recanted the title a little bit is, of course, everyone who's ever actually been a slave does mind being owned, and so that's why it's sort of wrong. But what I was trying to do, I'd written 2 previous papers about AI ethics that hadn't really grabbed people's attention. And so this time I sort of MIT'd it. I was like, I'm going to write a title that people will pay attention to. And it worked. And I think that's part of the reason I got to be able to do this policy work that I've been doing.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I totally agree. I think we create the things, and therefore we can create them in various different ways, and part of that is how should we do that, and what are the things that we shouldn't do. For sure.
And the desire to create something that you're ethically obliged to is completely natural. It's as I just said, it's basic and biological. You can understand why we want to make something we're obliged to.
Yeah. And
so that's why it is a kind of discipline. Some people say that I'm sort of arguing for AI asceticism. But look, that's what ethics is. Nobody sets up ethics to get you to do stuff that's you're already going to do anyway, right? I shouldn't say it. I think fundamentally what ethics is it's the way that a society self-organizes. So it doesn't mean it has to be awful, right? It actually, there's a lot of pleasure in having harmony and coherence, right? But the point is that it's about how do you cooperate with people, and usually you make a rule because there was a bunch of people that found defecting fun.
Yeah.
Right? So you try
and bring them back in.
Right.
Yeah.
You're trying to find of all the ways to have fun, let's do it in ways that allows most people to be relatively happy or whatever. Obviously it's very hard
sort
to
of cohesion.
Again, back to this statement about the fundamental questions of morality are hard. Coming up with what you're ultimately doing. I think that I'm actually thinking, and this is kind of a digression that you might think, but it falls out of the research in these kinds of questions. I think that we ought to be rethinking all of ethics in terms of theoretical biology.
Yeah.
And people don't want to go there because they associate biology with determinism. Mm-hmm. I don't. If you're worried about determinism, go read Dan Dennett or something. Read Freedom Evolves or Elbow Room or something.
Yeah.
Or whoever you like on that topic. So I the idea of free will and the idea of justice are things that our society has evolved because it's useful for us, for our self-organizing and for our perpetuation. And I think they're useful ideas we shouldn't let go of, right? And to me, that's what matters, right?
Yeah.
And when people say, oh, but if I can understand how this works, then there is no justice, or whatever. It's no. Even if you can say, and so that's the trying to get no, you don't need the magic part then the other part still holds. So you are responsible. And of course, we also, as a society, might decide that we're responsible to try to help you if you can't help something. But on the other hand, the concept of free will and the concept of responsibility does help a lot of people regulate their lives.
Yeah.
And it does help us build these beautiful structures like this. Because we're probably not going to steal any of these books in our backpacks, even though these guys probably wouldn't search it.
Yeah. Don't say it too loudly.
Yeah.
Do you, there's this question of kind of intelligence being attributed to machines, and do you think it would be more advantageous to evolve intelligence, which would be an interesting way of doing it, or by designing or creating as if by a omnipotent designer or intelligent design, some sort of maybe let's say general AI, something like that. Okay. Do you think?
Well, you have a lot of things packed together there, so let me stop and pull a couple apart. Yeah. First of all, even if we choose to design something by evolution, then we still choose to design it.
Yes.
So again, people talk to me. In fact, my students say, "Very good question. Hardly ever gets asked." But surely, surely AI is also a product of evolution because it's a product of us and we're a product of evolution.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but this goes back to this thing about responsibility. Responsibility and justice and obligation are things that we've found to be useful for organizing us, and we've got them now. And so what defines an artifact is that it has a designer. And so we are designing, whether we use evolution for part of that design or not.
Yeah.
No one just conceives of an algorithm then suddenly spontaneously generates a robot.
But that stabs to the heart of the machine learning kind of debates, and there's lots of debates around insurance and things like that to do with automated cars, because they could be working with machine learning, and you may design it and you might put that thing in motion, but actually you don't necessarily know what that motion is going to be at the end of the day, because it's inverted commas learning.
So I actually think that a lot of this is people don't forget, I already said some people really want to create life or whatever. They want to pass the responsibility off. But a lot of it I also think is a big smokescreen of people trying to get out of responsibility for doing proper care and concern about the release of their products. And that was one of the things the principles of robotics were really trying to make sure we didn't do. And that's one of the things I'm really trying to make sure that the European Commission doesn't do when they do their legislation. And so that's part of the reason. I mean, I actually already have some law professors lined up in the case, if they do legislate that there's a possibility of AI e-personhood, then we would sue to try to show that law is incoherent.
Right. Okay.
So I've been working on this problem for a while, but I'm slightly digressed now.
That's great. That's great. So you're ready for the European legislation to come in, and then
if it comes in, we're hoping not. We're working hard to make sure it doesn't come in.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But if it comes in, then that would be the thing we would do next, right?
Yeah.
We would really, and the reason for that is because basically what I see is happening is like they're saying, oh, wouldn't it be great? This would solve our problems with insurance, and it's similar to the Norwegian model or something.
Yeah.
That the car itself would get the money that it's paid, that it generates, and then the car itself would pay taxes, and the car itself would have pay for liability insurance.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, but see, this is what happens with corporations. I mean, in general, people. Let's step back before I mentioned about moral agents. So a legal person is very much like a moral agent. There's this basic concept that some people have access to the law, have an understanding of the law, and are actually therefore basically citizens, members of the society. This actually goes back to before everybody was, like, so some people were actually, they're what all the rules and ethics are for, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why they have these arguments about, like, can you be a moral agent, or can you be a moral subject without being a moral agent? So they're actually trying to say, like, I have slaves and you don't have to do anything about them or something. So that was they were sort of like trying to come up with excuses for, like, your patency doesn't make sense here.
Yeah.
Right. And that's of course why some people are saying, oh, don't, that we can't make that mistake again. Although again, this is a feminist issue. I've digressed again. But anyway, this is a very big feminist issue, which is that if what you learned from the feminist movement was that a machine might be as much like a man as a woman is like a man, then you haven't learned enough from the feminist movement yet. But all right, okay, so legal personhood is this thing. These are the people who can have rights and obligations legally in society. And a lot of people say, well, why are companies legal persons? And part of the reason is that for hundreds of years it's been that way, and a lot of the law is set up to accommodate that. But the excuse is basically that companies are a lot like humans, like people. So companies can know their rights and notice that this was an important part. You cannot actually be a legal person if you can't pursue your own rights. You just then you become something that has welfare that other people things take care of, but you don't have rights. You have welfare.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So which is part of the incoherence of the rights of the unborn, right? So that they're not able to pursue their own rights.
And that's a very big issue in the States at the moment.
Well, it's an issue. But anyway, so let's not go down that direction. So the point is that, right. So the other thing, though, is that they can be subject to the same sanctions. So, ever since, you can look at the chimpanzees, and if they don't like what each other's doing, they beat each other up or whatever, right? So if we have certain sets of things that we do to people that we don't think are doing the right thing. We take away their liberty, we take away their property, we basically shorten their lives in various ways. And we can do the same thing to corporations, and corporations also care. They also care about social status. They also care about wealth. They care about the things the kinds of things you do to it. With a machine, you could imagine building a machine that would care about those things, but that would be kind of artificial, because whatever you put in to care about that, you could take back out again.
It's not
so
inherent.
It's definitionally artificial. Sorry.
Yeah.
So the basic argument here is that the reason the reason that chimpanzees can't be legal persons is that they can't know and pursue their own needs, their own legal stuff, right? Their own rights. And the reason machines can't is not that. I'm happy to think that they might know. These books, in some sense, know their right. If it's a book about rights, it would know rights, right? But in that case, it couldn't pursue them. But a computer could maybe pursue its rights.
Yes.
But what kind of sanctions could be subject to? And so the thing is that even with the legal persons that are corporations, there are already corporations that create sort of fake corporations to take out a liability. And so that then humans, we figured out a long time ago that debtors' prisons don't work, and so we allow the people to go bankrupt. Maybe we shouldn't let companies go bankrupt, but we do. All right? And so when the company goes bankrupt, then all the people that had investment in that don't have a problem. So if you have a company that you don't want to have dissolved and you don't want to sell off all its assets when it goes bankrupt, you create another little company, put all the liabilities on that little company, and then allow that one to be nuked. And then you've protected yourself. Okay? So our argument is that that's what people are trying to do with the AI. That they're basically trying to say, okay, if the robot goes wrong, it's the robot's fault. And if you've been, horribly maimed in an accident, sue the robot. When the robot runs out of money, which it probably will never have that much money, that's it. Whereas the corporation that actually was profiting, think of it this way. The way I think about it is literally that a corporation is spinning off, it's automating part of its business process, right? So to me, that is still absolutely part of the corporation. And so that's why, to me, that is just absolutely a way to get out of taxes, because believe me, you want to make an impression on people that are members of parliament, right? And I haven't done this in British parliament. This is the members of the European Parliament.
Yeah.
But you just sit there in a room and say, trust me, I'm a programmer. You come up with any law you want about taxation of robots.
Yeah.
I will come up with the robot, the robots for a company, or the overall design that will be the least amount of money. It's not like people. People are accountable. Right? It means something to be a person. With a robot, you can construct any number of them to evade taxation.
So I've got a rebuttal to this.
Okay.
Want to hear it?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So there is an argument to say within ethical frameworks, historically, that machines have been likened to animals in various ways.
Yeah.
Which is obviously not a great argument, but we've grown through the 20th century to to attribute some moral, ethical frameworks to animals, right? So we have legislated that animals shouldn't be treated in certain ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
For sure. And given those rights,
they're not rights.
Not rights.
That's welfare.
Welfare, right?
So that's
So they're a patient rather than a.
Right. They're a patient without being an agent.
Exactly.
So they're a moral patient, but they're not a legal person.
Yes.
And so they don't have rights, they have welfare, and actually that's one of the ways you can usually discriminate the terrorists from the advocates. Because if they say animal rights, they're probably in favor of bombing clinics or something, right?
Right.
So it's actually, it's a fine point, and I don't like to argue semantics, but I'm just telling you that's kind of a flagging up thing.
Yeah.
So the point is, and this is the point I was trying to make before, if you actually care about the welfare of machines, then build them in a way such they can't suffer. Yeah. That's why I'm saying it's incoherent. It doesn't make sense that we should build machines that would suffer. So this is actually sort of a second order moral patiency. I'm saying it would be wrong for us to create something that we're obliged to.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So and it's partly that we'd be wrong because we'd be creating that thing that would then suffer or whatever it would do, right?
Yep.
So the point is that that we're obliged to make things we're not obliged to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I agree. I don't think it's kind of useful to create something which not only are we obliged to, but also has some intricacies that humans actually don't want, are negative to our own well-beings, like getting ill or, causing harm to a robot is unnecessary ability, isn't it?
Well, you see, again, this is this thing about, but people can say, but the human condition is beautiful, all right? But even when you're describing aesthetics, it's hard. That is part of us being apes, and it's hard to imagine. I mean, it's not that hard. We know we can go out and find something, build a deep learning network that would recognize which of these paintings you liked, right? Yeah. And so you might say, "Oh, that lines up with my sense of beauty," right? Yeah. So you can imagine a machine having a sense of beauty in that sense. But but art aesthetics, that has a lot to do with human health. Human in-group, out-group recognition, these sorts of pieces. And what's hard to understand is what the advantage of constructing things that would be competing with us for those resources are. And how much would that disrupt our society if we're worrying about building these things that can basically be our affect sinks, our attention sinks. And I'm using the word sink here like a computer scientist or like a electronics.
Like a ground.
So it's a place where everything can go to ground. Yeah. So basically, what I'm saying is that you have this bottomless pit, because you can that will take your attention and make you feel valued. So maybe you live longer or something.
Yep.
But what would be your actual social value? Maybe it would be better to not just sink it down into some AI, but communicate with other humans.
Yep.
If you don't like humans, you might say, no, I'd rather have people taking care of machines. But again, that's not actually socially stable, because you wouldn't be alive if there wasn't some kind of society that constructed you.
So you have this negative view of the Japanese kind of incorporation of machines into healthcare and things like that.
I'm concerned about it. So that's so we actually worked very hard on that with respect to the EPCRC principles. So the fourth principle is the most controversial one, which says that a machine's nature should be transparent. And the concern is that if a machine's nature is transparent, then it wouldn't be as useful in these healthcare situations.
Sure. And
I don't actually believe that. It took me years, but I came up with a really simple counterexample, which is that you watch movies and you cry and you laugh and you're deeply invested in the characters. Maybe some people are more invested in television characters than their actual friends, right? Which is another issue, right? But and they're fiction, right? They're fiction. And maybe at some level you don't. I mean, when people meet actors or actresses, they tend to treat them like as if they were their characters. But on some level, you can ask the question, is Harrison Ford alive? Right, and people would come up with an answer that wouldn't matter which movies they'd seen. Right, it would have more to do with what newspaper they'd seen. They understand the difference between movies and newspapers, right? And so I think that's what we could do. I think we could still have, robots that we fall in love with and whatever when we want to.
Yep.
But then we also we could be able to say it's a device.
Yes.
And actually, there's some really interesting work about that says, what happens if people are being raised by things they can turn off? If they're falling in love, quote unquote. I mean, and I think it probably would be, you would feel this real bonding with something you can turn off. How then do you learn to make a peer relationship? Because peer relationships are essential to human society. So it's not okay that we all think that the best things we have, that we form the strongest relationships with things that we shut off. That's not something that's necessarily a positive outcome.
Yeah, that sounds like an experiment which wouldn't be good to do, but would be an interesting outcome.
Well, I think the thing is that, and that's what I was going back to, that I think to some extent we're already conducting that experiment. Right. This is actually, I'm thinking about writing a book. Speaking of books, hopefully I'll be sitting here in this store doing a book, we should say it again, toppings. It's great. So hopefully I'll be sitting here in toppings doing a book thing next year or something. But anyway, the name of the book is 10,000 Years of AI. And the idea is that we have had all these things, and more particularly in the 20th century, that the people are really invested in television, and they do give time to television. They're not giving to trying to find people to go bowling with or whatever.
Yeah.
And what is the consequence of that for society? And what is the consequence of that for families? The level of churn that happens in families, and what is I just heard, and this is like completely, I heard it from a PhD student, but I don't know where it came from, that there's already indications that families with I don't want to name a name here, but AI devices that you can just talk to from the middle of the room, that's already disrupting families. Now, that device is so new that it could very well be that there's just a brief disruption, there'll be a new equilibrium.
Sure.
But the question is technology part of why nominally, apparently, it seems that societies are more. I don't even know if they really are. You need to go out and get demographers. I remember seeing something that the level of the proportion of society that's illegitimate now is about the same as it was 200 years ago, at least in the Netherlands or someplace where they did a bunch of genetic testing, and they're just going, well, how did that work? Because they didn't have contraception then, right? So obviously, it's
a similar proportion.
Yeah, if it's a similar proportion is illegitimate, then what is the mechanism? But anyway, so maybe society has always been about the same level, and I don't know because I'm not a demographer. I do AI.
Yeah. What is so the couple of questions I always ask at the end, or nearing the end, because they might take us down a rabbit hole for sure.
Okay. How much time do we have?
I think a little while.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Okay, a little while.
Yep. Yeah. Just like 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
What are you excited about in AI in the future?
Excited. Like everybody else, I love getting the cool new toys. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, right now, again, because of the political situation we're not really talking about, one of the things that I'm most looking forward to, which I have no idea how to make it happen, is but again, we're doing research with my PhDs on this, is how do we help people understand the complex systems like societies better in such a way that they can get through this sort of truthiness thing.
Yeah.
And it may be the answer is that you can't, because like I said, in periods of high political polarization, then maybe, belief, it's more important that belief is tribal, like it's telling you in group, out group, rather than telling you something about the world. And so maybe we just do all start believing weird things. But it'd be nice if we could help people, come down more on the side of like that actually I can see how that works. That
the
must
rational
be true.
Side.
Yeah,
also,
because there's this whole thing. I don't know if you know about this thing. It's called Conservapedia. They're trying to build a conservative alternative to Wikipedia, which is seen as liberal. But Wikipedia isn't liberal. It's just based in facts, right? But being based in facts is seen as liberal right now because so the which is interesting. It used to be that science was more seen as conservative, and that the left was very suspicious of science and was out with the flakier opinions and whatever. But right now, I think it just shows that actually the left is larger right now, or something, that it's able to sit right on science more or less. I mean, of course, we all know there's some parts that go off, but and that the right is the ones that sort of pushed off into these edges and fringes and having to have these really strange beliefs. I think that indicates that they're having more problems, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things we're working on right now.
That just sounds like crazy propaganda to me. That just sounds like...
Yeah, but why do different sides have the different kinds of crazy propaganda, and to what extent do they both?
So what's the psychology that's driving that sort of behavior?
But there certainly isn't a liberalpedia. I don't. So and like I said, the Wikipedia's gotten decent at making sure that you actually ground things in citations of science and things like that. So there is... Science is a narrative, but it's also grounded in reality. So it's not only a narrative; it's a special narrative. that's really, you can still sometimes get jerked around a little bit, but basically it's got this anchor that's like part of its prestige is based on actually being able to predict the future. And prediction is hard, but it's not impossible. We do have, and that's how we're able to do medicine, and that's how we're able to solve all kinds of problems, build laptops.
Yep, nice. I had something that I wanted to say, and I can't remember.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
No, because something kind of like on that sort of train of thought. Maybe I'll come back to it. The other side of the coin is what is worrying you, and I mean you said some of this already, but what's kind of frightening about AI?
There's a lot of things that you mentioned. I think. Fundamentally, AI means that we're all sharing a lot of information, and that means that we have less privacy, basically. So I'm very worried about. It's not just like someone's going to see my pictures or something. It's about if you can predict what someone's going to do, then it's really easy to manipulate them.
Right.
And to what extent are we seeing really bizarre political outcomes because people are being manipulated in these really kind of again with false facts or whatever. So we could see more and more of that. We could see right now, as I said, AI is part of the general technological landscape that could be leading to greater wealth inequality. And my best guess, and this is like I said, this is not just it's literally an educated guess. It's what we're working on right now.
Yep.
But my best guess is that every time you come up with a new technology that sort of reduces the costs of producing something, then you lose some of the differentiation too, and you actually sort of need to reinvent governance to spread the wealth around again. Right. Because when it's piled up as high as it is right now, the last time it was piled up as high was World War One, and so you just get this breakdown in social order. It's almost like a selection event or something. So the thing I'm most afraid about right now is the World War III. And which, like I said, it's not directly caused by AI. It's not Skynet. But that we need to get on top of the economics of this, and that we need to get up on top of the politics, the political impact.
So that could manifest not as necessarily as World War III, but could mass civil unrest or something similar.
Well, basically, the thing that I worry about is that if individuals are too powerful, then states become less powerful, and borders don't matter as much anymore. In a way, I don't mean I'm obviously pro-immigrant since I've immigrated here. But what I mean is that you lose the collapse of being able to protect each other and
their rights.
War. I think that's literally war. But we can go, like, here's another thing about the truthiness. Just in the last year, we've gotten to the point where we can forge handwriting, we can forge voices. And decades ago, we got to the point where if you had some video and then you had a stream of voice, that you could fake video to go with the stream of voice. So we're in a situation now where we could make anyone say anything and show them video of them doing it, right? And I mean, we didn't used to have video evidence, a century ago, but we're losing it again. But there might be a nasty point of transition where people think we have video evidence and we don't.
Yeah.
And so that's the, like when Stalin used to airbrush pick things out of photos, and people had gotten used to thinking photos were real, and they didn't know that you could airbrush stuff out of them. Right. So we're kind of, I'm hoping at that point of transition will be really short, because again, we know better. We can point at these examples. We can say, oh yeah, right, okay, so we can't trust video as evidence anymore. Okay.
Yeah. And
that'd be great if we had less video surveillance. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be really good, actually.
So yeah, that's one of the things that I actually had a conversation recently, which unfortunately was in Chatham House, and I can't say, but who was saying it, but I can say what it was. That basically we were sitting around saying, people don't realize just how much information they're bleeding, and what would it take to get them to say, we don't want this in our house anymore. We don't want mobile, keep mobile phones in the microwave by the door or something, and nothing else in the house.
Do you think? For me, that would it would be useful to have some sort of, you'd have like a product mark on the back that says, "This is electrically sound." That's something we have already, right? So maybe you'd have something on the back of your products which said, "This is using machine learning type A, and it's using, and in order to operate, it takes this much information," and all these sorts of kind of like almost a categorization of an explanation of what's going on.
So that's okay. Again, you've got 3 ideas packed into one. Let's see if I can get through them all very quickly.
Sure.
One was that yes, that's absolutely the principle for that somewhere you could download if you wanted to, and even if you knew you'd never get around to it, just as long as some proportion of the population occasionally did, that you could keep double checking this.
Which is what you were mentioning earlier.
So that's one of the ideas of transparency, which is becoming as long as the Britain's in the EU is one of our rights, because the Parliament's already said that we need, the Commission's already said last year that we have the right to explanation.
Yep.
But I know I was going to do this, and I'm going to drop the other 2 because I took the easy one first. What did you just say? Oh, right. Okay. The second thing is that this isn't really just about I remember. Okay. Yep. So the second thing is about data. So I do absolutely think that this next order that we'll have to achieve is going to be that we own data about ourselves.
Yep.
And that our personal data is going to be like our personal property. We know that the government can get into it. The police could get into your house if they wanted to.
Yep.
But if you found the police standing in your house, you'd be astonished, and you would go to the law, right? You would go to some other law, presumably. but by and large, you don't have to worry about that very much.
Yeah.
Right. So the third point, though, is that this isn't about machine learning. This is actually what I'm arguing, is that by bringing artificial intelligence devices into our home, like by having a robot there that's looking at and listening to us, as and we think, oh, isn't this nice? We have a friend. Unfortunately, we've also brought in a vector for cyber attack.
Yes.
Right. So anyone, I don't even know if you would necessarily trust whoever the company is.
Oh yeah, exactly. Not just attack, but misuse.
Yeah. All these things, when you read the stuff about what's going on about hacking and whatever, it seems like whenever the government goes into some bank's database, they find like 5 different actors there. 5 different foreign actors.
Yep.
And why would it be different for our household robots? So then you don't know who's absorbing information from you and why and what they're going to do with it.
Yep.
And so that's why I'm saying it might actually become that we don't have technology in the house at all.
Yep.
That we still use it like in these, because it's cool and we use it for different things, but we don't want to have it in our house.
Yeah.
We don't have it, and I don't know if there's any hope for that and so actually there's a really interesting meeting that Princeton is putting on in Berlin, weirdly.
Berlin's a center for Hacktivation.
Oh, okay. But it's the Princeton Fung meeting on Society 3.0 or something, and the idea is basically, can we still have liberty given the technology right now?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting question. It's an arms race, and AI again is just a small part of a larger problem there.
Yeah. For me, I would not have a Echo or some other product that I have to talk to.
Try not to mention any products.
Sorry, yeah. So some sort of product, household names in my house, which I have to interact with. I would, if I wanted that, I would go and make it myself. And in doing so, I would know what the data was and where it was going and how that would operate. And obviously, that isn't something that I would actually probably be able to achieve on a similar scale or functionality-wise, which is a problem. So you're basically saying, I'm opting in to this bad situation because I want the good things out of it, which is not necessarily positive way
I'm not sure there's a lot of
capitalism
ways
or anything like that.
There's a lot of reasons you might not be able to achieve that, and one of that is that whatever you create, there could still be people hacking into it, and how do you know that you're getting on top of that kind of? Maybe you can, maybe
I'm pretty good
at that stuff. Okay, all right, fine, but I would still, I mean, like, because there's these things like de-anonymization. So, for example, one of the things that one of my colleagues at Princeton, Nick Feimster, I mean, he's not a colleague, he actually works at Princeton, unlike me. Right. But anyway, one of the people I know because I'm at Princeton has shown that you can tell when someone's home just by how many packets their Internet of Things stuff is sending. Yeah. Because when no one's home, there's not much going on. Yeah. And so not many packets go out. And then you come home, and then the packets go out. And so you may not have anticipated that when you were thinking of other...
It's actually much worse than that, unfortunately, given which I find miraculous, like both like really interesting from a scientific and practical point of view, and really horrifying from a social point of view. You can actually pinpoint where people are within the house using basically techniques to monitor Wi-Fi signals. Yeah. If you monitor the Wi-Fi signals for a day or 2 days, you can actually learn that they peak or trough as people are walking through space. Which is fascinating to me that we can do that, but also horrifying.
Yeah, exactly. So we know exactly where people are, and that was what I was going to say. Even if you could somehow say, okay, therefore I'm not going to have any Wi-Fi signals in my house, I'm not going to have any electronic devices, and get rid of the lights, just use candles. You know, the point is that people, when you walk through the door, just from the way you're standing, just from your gate, you should come. We're having a meeting in Bath in April, the AISB at, the 19th to 21st? But the first day, there's a guy speaking, Bjorn Schuller, who's done, he recognizes emotions, both from voice and from vision, how you're standing or whatever. But the thing is, it turns out the emotions in that sense, it's not just like, are you happy or sad? You can tell if someone's lying. You can tell if they're stressed, you can tell if they're tired, you can tell if they're sick, you can tell all kinds of things already with AI. And so the better our models are, the less data we need about any one person to predict what they're going to do. Yeah. And it might be the day that you just walk out of your house and someone takes a picture and they can predict what you're going to do, right? At least well enough to decide how they want to influence your vote.
Yep. And with that bombshell, thank you, Joanna, for coming on the podcast.
Sure.
Where can we find you?
Huh?
Where can we find you?
Oh, J2 Bryson at Twitter is the best thing.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Thanks very much. Okay.